Hello, fight fans, and welcome to Fight News Now Extra. I'm John Pollock, and today Robin Black, John Ramdeen, and I will be breaking down the highlights from the UFC's final card of the year from this past weekend, plus a strange signing announced by the organization, and more in today's headlines. Lyoto Machida looked tremendous on Saturday night, only needing 62 seconds to stop CB Dalloway with a paralyzing left kick to the body, which set up Machida's strikes to finish the fight and earn his third win in the middleweight division since cutting down last year. Machida hadn't fought since this past July, where he dropped the decision to current middleweight champion Chris Weidman at UFC 175. Renan Barão made his return to the octagon, submitting Mitch Gagnon in the third round of their bantamweight bout. The fight was contested much closer than the odds would have suggested over the first two rounds, but it was the third that Gagnon appeared to tire, and after a failed head and arm throw attempt, Barão landed on top and was able to set up the arm triangle and get the submission. And it was announced on the UFC broadcast that Quinton Jackson has signed with the UFC, despite having fights remaining on his Bellator contract. Jackson has put out a statement that Bellator failed to live up to obligations in the contract and that Jackson was able to terminate the deal due to the breach. Jackson left the UFC in 2013 and signed with Bellator, where he fought 3 times for the organization. Here we are with John Ramdeen and Robin Black, and we go back to Saturday night. And what a performance from Lyoto Machida, 62 seconds.
Mediocre.
Just debilitating CB Dalloway. First time Dalloway's been stopped in over 3 years. And Lyoto Machida, just like that, I think we talked about this last week, John, that middleweight division even more intriguing next year, because I don't think Machida's that far away from another title shot down the road when you throw in Jacare, Rockhold with Chris Weidman defending against Vitor Belfort February 28th. I think the middleweight division is maybe the division to watch next year.
Yeah, and you know, hopefully Lyoto Machida, yes, we all know that he wants to get another crack at the title. The goal is to be the champion once again. But just the idea of all these crazy matchups for Lyoto Machida. We talked about Luke Rockhold. We know that Nick Diaz is fighting Anderson Silva. Machida's not going to fight Anderson Silva, but I'm sure he'd be more than happy to fight Nick Diaz. And again, who would not want to see Nick Diaz versus Lyoto Machida? There's so many fights. You throw Tim Kennedy in there.
I think you'll do Machida Rockhold.
That's right.
Yoel Romero you throw in there as well. I mean, man, it is quite the top 10.
Put up a column A and a column B and just
That's
put
right.
in, hey, how about we go Rockhold versus Kennedy again? Oh, what about Machida versus Jacare? Would those guys fight? I'd like to
It's where
see
the
that.
welterweight division was a year ago after George had vacated the title, and suddenly you had all these contenders, and just seeing who's going to emerge at the top of this mountain over the course of 2014. I think that's what you have at middleweight right now. I mean, if Chris Weidman is holding this title a year from now, he, to me, surpasses Anderson Silva as the greatest middleweight, considering the fights he might have in 2015.
Yeah,
all of that is contingent, of course, who he fights.
Just because the division, you look at Anderson Silva, and take nothing away from Anderson Silva, because I think most mixed martial artists, especially at the highest level, would consider Anderson Silva to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, mixed martial artists of all time. But during his run, we know that, yes, he defeated Dan Henderson and Rich Franklin. We also throw in the fact that he fought Forrest Griffin and James Irvin and Travis Lutter. So for Chris Weidman, this
it's
is
a murderer's row in
right
2015
now,
that he
the level of
potentially
competition,
is facing.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
so the level
much
is much
higher.
deeper, yeah.
And, you know, we talked about this on 5 rounds, and sometimes people don't like rematches, but I really would like to see Machida versus Weidman again. One, that was my fight of the year. I think it was yours, too. And it was
it was
1 or 1A
everybody.
for all of us, yeah. And, you know, Machida learned something in rounds 4 and 5, and he believes that that's his to have. He's never been in better shape. And, of course, Weidman will, and his camp will be thinking about the adjustments Machida makes and try to adjust around those
stop
ones.
him this
yeah,
time.
Exactly. And I'd really like to see that again. Machida really looked so smooth in this fight.
True, but at the same time, we've got to see Chris Weidman versus Vitor Belfort, Chris Weidman versus Jacare, Chris Weidman versus Luke Rockhold.
You know, of all these combinations, to me, Chris Weidman, Vitor Belfort is the least attractive to me out of all of those.
True, but the thing is, we all know about Vitor Belfort, and one thing about Vitor is when he is on, there are few fighters ever in the history of the sport that are as explosive and confident as Vitor Belfort.
Yeah.
And I know there's those other things surrounding Vitor.
And I think that's maybe what sometimes will distract us. And I'm guilty of it, because I look at him and go, oh, yeah, that was all this TRT talk, all this, you know, testosterone discussion. Oh, now he's not on it. It distracts your mind away from his highlight reel, from him almost armbarring John Jones, from 2 or 3 head kick knockouts in a row. You get distracted by all of that stuff. If Vitor Belfort walks in there, the Vitor Belfort that he can be at his best, this is a great fight.
Let's chat about Quinton Jackson. This is one that almost certainly is going to end in some kind of legal action. Bellator believes they still have an existing deal. Jackson says they breached the deal and he was able to terminate it. From your point of view, is this a good move for Quinton Jackson right now? Because for a guy that has a big name attached to him that is going to be paid based on his ranking inside of the UFC and what sponsors he can bring in. He had a prior relationship with Reebok that didn't end all that well. I'm surprised he wasn't able to make things work at Bellator, because that to me seems like the perfect place for him at this place in his career.
Well, Robin he mentioned the fact that, you know, what we're seeing from Bellator is they're trying to make these moves. So, and in order for the UFC, they don't want the eyeballs to go to Bellator. They want the eyeballs to come to them.
Oh, for UFC, I understand.
So that's
it's
why.
For Quinton, though, I'm thinking from himself selfishly that Bellator, you can bring in, that guy is just littered with sponsors, and that's going to somewhat have to be negotiated when he comes back.
Right. Yeah, I think Quinton Jackson hasn't sort of found that happy place in what he's doing for quite some time. And as a result, he's breaking up with every girlfriend that he has, metaphorically speaking, and now he's going back to his ex. Yeah. And, you know, the interesting thing from the UFC and Quinton Jackson and some of these big moves that they're making is there's this idea in media right now called disruption, where there's so much going on. The volume of media is growing exponentially. To even be noticed for a moment, you have to do something disruptive. You know, if you have me freaking out about signing CM Punk, that benefits the UFC. All media companies are making disruptive movements to create controversy and discussion. And I think Jackson is one. I think CM Punk is one. I think even this lawsuit benefits them. Disruption is where it's at in media right now to catch attention.
Anyone that jumps out at you that is going to get Quinton, presuming he can fight in UFC right away, I'm thinking he might get thrown to a guy like Patrick Cummins. And against high-level wrestlers, I just worry about where Quinton's going to be at this stage of the game at 36.
I think they have to use him properly. I think a fight with the Shogun would be exciting. I think a fight with Jimmy Manning would be exciting. And I talked about it on 5 rounds. Let this guy go up to heavyweight and fight Roy Nelson. These guys are going to throw down, slug it out, and a lot of people will tune in to watch it.
Yeah, I like that. And, man, and there's a lot of 85ers who'd like to go up and take a piece of Jackson. He's a big name, and I think it'll be, I think it's a good signing if it happens.
We'll see. I think we're going to be talking about a lot of court cases in 2015. More Fight News Now Extra is coming your way.